Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this very busy Tuesday afternoon, and I apologize for starting a little bit later than normally for those of you guys on the live show. For those of you guys that tune into the podcast, you guys won't notice the difference, but I got held up in a meeting, so it's unfortunate as it is, but you got to do what you got to do. So we're going to go, without wasting any time, we'll dive straight into what the segments are going to be. So the first segment is going to be about the Pacific Division and the biggest questions for each and every single one of those teams, a part of the Pacific Division. And then in the second segment, we are going to be ranking the top 5 teams based off of just their young core. And I might follow up with this segment in the tomorrow and do another segment ranking the next, like the top 10 teams in the young core, like the teams after the top 5 when I'm done with that list. But that's going to be what the second segment is going to be about. Then for the third segment, and most likely the fourth segment, because I don't think I'm going to have time to fit all of it in just one segment, I'm going to go over the biggest questions for all the ranked college teams. I did this yesterday and I ran out of time, and I was able to get up to the 6th ranked team, which I believe was Baylor. So we're going to continue on with that list in the third and the fourth segment. And then we also have a special 5th segment that I reveal at the end of the 4th segment. So be sure to stay tuned for that to figure out exactly what that is. And before I begin, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show. Whether you got a burning question, hot take for the game, something you've been dying to share, we're all ears. If you want your comment or question to get noticed, then you can go ahead and use Super Chat. Just hit the $sign below the chat box and send in your message that way. And it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, that's okay. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker of every show segment, gsmcpodcast.net. and help out the show that way. And either or, you'll get your comments recognized in the next show on the live show. So do either or, and thank you so much for helping the show. All of your support means a lot to us. So with that out of the way, let's go right ahead and go into this first list, which is going to be talking about the Pacific Division. So all the teams in the Pacific Division, they're in rather questionable spots. Like, there's no real fantastic team on there. Like, there's just more so experiments, I guess you could say. The only team that I think is legitimately, solid in this division is surprisingly the Kings. And even then, the Kings didn't even do much in the postseason when they've been in the postseason. They didn't even make the postseason last year. But I think that of all the teams, they are the most complete team. And all the other teams, they sort of have their own problems, and they sort of have there's no real perfection around it. Like, for example, the Golden State Warriors, I mean, they only have Steph, and they do have Draymond as well. But it's how are the other role players are going to respond? It's it's not really, you can't really win everything with just Steph. And then with the Lakers, it's just LeBron and AD, along with every other problem that the entire roster has. So it's it's not really they're in a competing spot, either of those teams. But it's not they're in that much of a losing spot either. And now the Clippers, they're more questionable now because it's Paul George isn't there with Kawhi Leonard. And for the Suns, they're just going to try and run it back with Devin Booker and Beal and Kevin Durant. And, yes, those three, they are rather solid. But it's just I don't think those three are going to be enough to do enough damage in the postseason. So it's it's very weird where each of these teams are. Because it's anything can happen. Any one of these teams can start winning out, and I wouldn't be surprised. And any of these teams could also start losing out, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's very odd. So we'll start with the Golden State Warriors, since I started with them already. And obviously, they don't have Klay Thompson anymore, so it's going to be a little bit odd seeing the Golden State Warriors without such a competent shooter like Klay. And It's obviously going to take a while to adjust to the fact that he's in a Dallas Mavericks uniform, but part of the reason why the Warriors were able to, live with the fact that he was leaving was because they have high hopes for Brandon Podziemski. Forgive me if I botched that last name, but that's going to be the biggest question. Is Brandon Podziemski ready? And is he ready now? Because they gave up Clay in the hopes that this man would be very, very good, right? So you obviously you don't want to regret the decision of letting Klay Thompson go. And if this guy doesn't really capitalize on his position and the role that he's going to have on this team, then the Warriors, they might be in a lot of trouble. And he's obviously not the same type of, shooter that Klay Thompson is, but he did shoot 38.5% from three, providing necessary spacing for Steph and the Golden State Warriors. Podziemski also led the league in charges drawn with 38. A little fun fact there. It's not really a big important thing, I guess you could say, but it could change the outcome of a game. Like, it's not a big play, but it's a momentum type play that could change everything. So far, everything has sort of lined up for Podziemski, and now he just has to capitalize on his opportunity. So the Warriors are banking on Podziemski being able to blossom into a star player on the team. So if that doesn't happen, I'm not entirely sure how far the Warriors are going to be able to go while riding Steph Curry's coattails. So next team on this list are the Los Angeles Clippers, and the big question for the Clippers is, where do they go from here? Where on earth do they go from here? They just lost Paul George, and there goes my ring alarm. Let me silence my phone. They lost Paul George, and they still have Harden, and they still have Kawhi, but they were able to go farther in the postseason without Harden and without Kawhi. So where do they go from here? Are they just destined to be a first-round exit? Are they going to compete? Because, last season, it looked like they had a legitimate shot to compete. Aside from the Boston Celtics, they were the favorites when they acquired Harden and they were on that winning streak. I think they were, at one point, almost co-favorites with the Boston Celtics to win it all. And ultimately, towards the end of the season, they started to lose a bunch of games and they started to collapse. Clippers collapse happens all the time. And then in the postseason, against Luka, a player that they always seem to beat, they lost to Luka. Even though they didn't really have Kawhi for the series because Kawhi was injured again. And that's another problem with this team because it's where do you go from here? Because, you're able to make the postseason. But once you get into the postseason, you lose Kawhi. Kawhi has not been healthy for a single postseason aside from the one where he choked in 2020. And that's very concerning, especially if you're a Clippers fan, because, again, you're just stuck. It's you're stuck in the middle. You have no idea whether you're going to try to compete. You have no idea whether you're just going to lose out. You don't know. So that's why it's very confusing where the Clippers are going to go from here. I really can't decide. So next is the other Los Angeles team, the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, this team has a lot of questions that I really want answered, but I think the biggest one is if Los Angeles is going to start trading those picks, because you have several options. One, you trade the picks, you try to compete for a championship now, and, be able to take advantage of a prime LeBron. Or two, you just see if you can win with prime LeBron in the roster. See if LeBron at 40 years old can carry you. And that's sort of why the Lakers, they really don't want to gamble their young core away because they don't want to bank it all on an old LeBron. And I understand that. But I also don't understand why. Because it's an old LeBron and he's in his prime. If you're not trying to win championships when LeBron is in his prime, what are you doing? And we do have Anthony Monanzo's in the chat. How's it going? And he has a question. What is one team in the Pacific that can that you can see shocking everybody and making the playoffs and possibly making a deeper run that's not the normal suspects? Oh, that would be the Kings, easily. That is easily going to be the Sacramento Kings. And I'm going to talk about them. I actually talked about them before you tuned in. Like, the only team that I thought was legitimate and could actually make a legit deep playoff run was the Kings, because I feel like they have a very complete team and they have a very nice roster that meshes well together, and they do have some very underrated players, so there's not much attention that's going to be on them, as much attention as the Lakers, as much attention as the Phoenix Suns, much attention as Golden State, those kinds of things. So they'll have a lot less distractions. And on top of that, I mean, their roster is just very, very good. So I'm going to continue, since we are talking about the Kings, I might as well go ahead and continue on with the Kings, because why not? I'll be spontaneous. So the biggest question that I have for the Kings going into this one is, does DeMar DeRozan make them better? Because they recently just acquired DeMar, and now I'm sort of curious, is how is DeMar going to mesh well with this lineup as well? Because DeMar and De'Aaron, they both really like taking twos. And same thing with Sabonis as well. So I wonder if they're going to have enough three-point shooters to be able to mesh with those three players. And I also wonder if DeMar is going to be able to perform in the postseason when it matters most. And the Kings, much like the Warriors, they were the odd team out of the playoffs in a very loaded Western Conference after losing to the Pelicans in the play-in game. But I still feel like their team is just incredibly good. They might not have shown it because it was super stacked, but I really think that they have a shot of being a pretty good team. They're also rather young as well, which is something that a lot of people tend to forget, just how young of a team that these guys actually are. Now, obviously, they're not getting any younger, so they have to sort of hurry up and start competing. But I think now that they have DeRozan, they'll be able to. It should, theoretically, it should be able to propel them into the postseason, theoretically. So again, we have to see how that works. And I'm going to acknowledge your comment right after I talk about the not the Sacramento Kings, the Phoenix Suns and my questions for them. So the big question for Phoenix is, will Budenholzer be the needed change for this roster? And or for this team, I should say, excuse me. And since making the finals, the Suns have fired 2 coaches, traded for Kevin Durant, traded for an aging Chris Paul for Bradley Beal, and have only made it as far as the second round in the playoffs in that span. And so now it's sort of where do the Suns go from here? Especially after losing and getting swept in the first round. It's they couldn't do anything to their lineup. They were forced to run it back. So really, the biggest question is, will Budenholzer have good enough coaching schemes to help this team and sort of give this team the next step and propel them into the next step? So those are all the questions for each of the Pacific teams. And I'm going to acknowledge all of your comments shortly after this break before I go into the second segment, which is going to be about ranking each and every single one of the NBA teams based off of their young core. So I'm going to be ranking teams based off of their young core. I'm going to start with the top 5, and then maybe tomorrow I'll do another segment following up on that. But for now, I'm just going to do the top 5 teams based off of their young core. So if you're interested in that, be sure to tune in right after this short break. I'll acknowledge your questions after the break as well, so be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Thank you for tuning in to the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I am going to be ranking the top 5 teams based off of their young core. So, this is just a list that I decided to do. It was inspired by an Instagram post, so I just decided, all right, you know what, that actually looks cool. I might as well go ahead and talk about that and do my own and, give my opinions on this. So before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a burning question or a hot take for the game, something you've been dying to say. We're all ears. And if you really want your comment or question to get noticed, then you can use Super Chat. Just hit the $sign below the chat box, send in your message that way, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support the channel as well. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, fine, that's okay. You can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and send in your comments or donations that way. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the second segment. Actually, before I do, I'm going to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat. Manenzo commented a lot. He said, the Lakers need to start thinking about rebuilding instead of catering to LeBron, and instead of treating their young pieces, trading, I'm assuming he means trading their young pieces and draft capital. And I understand, where you're coming from with that. And yeah, the Lakers should have considered doing that. However, I also feel like LeBron is still one of the better players in this league. And if you aren't trying to win with LeBron, then you are insane. That's genuinely just how I feel. If you are not trying to win with a prime LeBron on your team, then you're absolutely insane. Especially considering how there's not many years, we're not sure how long he can keep this up. So you have to make the most out of it, the absolute most out of it. Now, another comment that he said is he's not sure if DeMar is going to be a starter just because of the fact that De'Aaron Fox is also a ball-dominant player. That just because they're two ball-dominant players doesn't mean that one of them is going to come off the bench. We saw that Chris Paul and James Harden were both ball-dominant players, and they were both able to share the ball rather effectively. So I don't think that DeMar is going to come off the bench. I think that the rotations are actually going to be a lot better now that they have DeMar. So maybe De'Aaron will actually sit a bit more and have DeMar handle the ball. But again, DeMar is much more of a scorer than he is a playmaker like De'Aaron Fox. So you need someone like De'Aaron Fox on the court at the same time as DeMar DeRozan is on the court. And on top of that, the game is 48 minutes. They both can share minutes. It's not that big of a deal. And they have a deep enough roster to be able to adjust the lineups however they want as well. So he's not going to come off the bench. It would be criminal if he comes off the bench. Unless they experiment and they play better. But I don't think he's going to come off the bench. I don't think he's going to start coming off the bench. Another question he had is another statement he had is he doesn't trust Phoenix Suns, and neither do I. I'm not a big fan of Kevin Durant. I don't think Kevin Durant is what you need to win, just given off the fact that Golden State was able to win both without him, both before and after getting him. So, and the fact that Kevin Durant hasn't made it nearly as far as Golden State has since that time, I'm not a big fan of Kevin Durant, and I don't really trust him all that much. And before I run out of time in this entire segment answering all of those questions, let's go ahead and talk about the top 5 teams based on their young core. So number 1 for me is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, I was really, really, really close to putting OKC over San Antonio because OKC made the postseason. They were the best team in the Western Conference, and they are the youngest team to ever make the postseason. So I was this close to putting them at number 1. And want to know what stopped me? this tall man right here. This dude right here is what stopped me, because Victor and the rest of the lineup is ridiculous. So, and it's primarily Victor, the reason why the Spurs are at number 1. They have Stephon Castle, who's 19. They have Devin Vassell, Jeremy Shohan, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones, Malik Braham, Blake Weasley, and so many other players that haven't even turned 25 yet. Keldon Johnson is the only player that I mentioned that's 25 years old. And these guys, they might wreak havoc on the NBA. And especially Victor. Like, everyone's going to be afraid of Victor. And this coming year, everyone's afraid of Victor already. And so the second team, by like probably 0.1 centimeter, is OKC. Now, again, I wanted to put them at number 1, but the reason why I didn't was because of Victor Wembanyama. But aside from that, these guys are without a doubt the best team and the best young core in the NBA right now. Like, currently, right now. And, like, again, I would have put them at number 1, but Victor really, like, was the big reason why that stopped me, along with the rest of the players that they got in the draft as well, and just how many more younger players they have than OKC, because they do have much more younger players on the roster than the Spurs, like OKC. But aside from that, their players are absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they have Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, Nikola Topic, Cason Wallace, Dort, Aaron Wiggins, Dylan Jones, Jalen Williams, Isaiah Joe. They have so much young talent on their roster that they're, especially like with Chet, like we've seen what Chet can do in We've seen what Chet is able to do in the regular season. Now he just has to sort of hone his game and sort of like, I feel like he just needs more to develop, and he can really be a dominant force. And I didn't even mention SGA. He's only 26 years old. So while he's not as young as the rest of the players that I just mentioned, he's still relatively young, and he was in the running for MVP. So this team is without a doubt one of the best young teams, if not the best young teams in the NBA. Excuse me. So next team on this list is the Houston Rockets. Now they recently added Reed Shepherd in the draft, which was a very, very solid pickup in my opinion. Not to mention they already have Sengun on the roster. They have Amon Thompson. They also have Jalen Green. They have Jabari Smith, Cam Whitmore, and AJ Griffin, just to name a few of the young players on the roster. And I think Sengun is going to be, the face of this team. And depending on how good, Reed Shepherd can develop, he could be a really solid shooter and a really solid scorer for this team. And excuse me. And there is Mananzo has another question in the chat. He says, "Do you think Oklahoma City might have to start thinking of trading some of the young players that are off the bench to get established veterans who have experience winning playoff games?" No. No, I don't think they need that. I think what they need is just more experience to be in the playoffs. Like, I think they just need to keep this roster and be able to keep making the playoffs and have more, and if they keep making the playoffs and they keep playing in these high leverage games, they're going to adjust to the pressure, and they're going to be able to adjust naturally. I don't think you need to... you can add maybe one veteran on your team, but I don't think the Thunder need to trade any of their pieces to try and acquire veteran players, because I genuinely think that over time, give it 2 years, maybe even a year, maybe this season and then next season, and they're already going to be used to that playoff pressure, and they'll be competing. I'm pretty confident on that. I don't think they need... they already made... They made the second round, and they lost to the team that made the finals. As the youngest team, that's very impressive, so I don't really think you really need to change anything in the lineup yet, unless you consistently get met with disappointment after disappointment. Because I don't think last season was a disappointment for the Thunder, because this was the first time that the young core has actually made the postseason. I don't expect the young core to play good in their first postseason. I just don't, because that's just ridiculous. Not everybody is as good as Donovan Mitchell to start out in the postseason. Not everybody is as good as LeBron to start out in the postseason. And even then, some people didn't think LeBron was good in the postseason. So, it takes time. And I think that if the Thunder continue with this roster, they'll eventually do it. And fourth on this list is the Orlando Magic. Orlando Magic. They made the playoffs last season, and they almost won in Game 7, but unfortunately they didn't have home field advantage. And I think the reason why they lost really was because they didn't have home field advantage in Game 7. But they have Paolo Banchero, arguably one of the most underrated young players in the entire NBA. Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Jet Howard, Anthony Black, Tristan Da Silva, Wendell Carter Jr., Cole Anthony, just to name a few of the young players on the roster. They made the playoffs last season, and I have a feeling that they can go even farther in this season. Again, this team is very, very underrated, and Paolo Banchero is also very underrated. You barely hear anybody talk about how good he is, and he played phenomenally in the postseason. And last team on this list, and then I'll acknowledge Mananzo's other question, is the Memphis Grizzlies. And they have Ja Morant, they have Jaren Jackson Jr., they have Gigi Jackson, they also have Vince Williams Jr., Zach Edey, who they just acquired in the draft, and Jalen Wells, just to name a few of the young players on the roster. And, since when they had Ja, you could argue that the Grizzlies were a competing team. And, since they last season, since they lost Ja Morant, they weren't that much of a competing team. But now that they have him, I have a feeling that this young roster is going to be back in the postseason in no time. And I wouldn't be surprised if they actually replace the Clippers spot in the postseason, right? And they make the postseason aside from the Clippers, and the Clippers miss the postseason. But we'll see. And before I go into this next break, I'm going to acknowledge the comments. And Monanzo says, even though they were the best team last year, a lot of people didn't really expect OKC to be that good. I don't know if he means that, if he's saying, because he's saying City to be that good luck. Now, I'm not sure if he thinks that was luck, but yes, luck comes in a lot of postseason wins, and you just have to, it is what it is. And let me just continue reading. And he also says, I think Orlando might be one of the teams that needs to add more veteran experience in their starting lineup or off the bench. Now, that I could see happening. Yeah, sure. Maybe the Orlando Magic needs some veteran players, but aside from that, I think Paulo's just fine. And last comment, I don't know what it is with Memphis. I can't trust Morant to not get in off the court issues. That's going to cost the team. And yes, that is always the issue when you're talking about Ja Morant, his off the court issues, what he likes to post, what he likes to do, what he does, what he doesn't do, this, that, and the other. I'm not going to get too deep into what he does and what he doesn't do. I'm sure most of you guys already know what he allegedly did and what he was allegedly holding and this, that, and the other. And, it's a lot of off-court distractions that prevent this team from being a great team. And you just sort of need, now that I feel like now that Ja Morant is 25, now that he's sat out most of the season, and now that he's sort of seen this, that, and the other, and what his actions lead to, I think now maybe, just maybe, he matured. Just maybe. Maybe. He matured and he realized, oh, okay, I have to do this. Oh, okay, I have to hold up to this standard. Oh, I have to do this. Maybe, again, this is a huge maybe. I have no idea if he actually learned from his mistakes, but we'll see. We'll see going into next season, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and go into a short break. And then in the third segment and the fourth segment, I'm going to talk about the biggest questions for each of the ranked college teams. So stay tuned if you're interested in NCAA basketball. And I will be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more.
GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to talk about the I'm going to talk about the biggest questions for all of the ranked college teams going into the NCAA season. And I'm just looking at my phone, and apparently somebody sold a pair of Falcons at Panther tickets for $1.80. Oh my lord. If any of you guys are interested in football, we have other football podcasts if you guys are interested in listening to that. So go ahead and check out the channel if you guys like football as well. I personally like football, but obviously, time to talk basketball. So, excuse me, but let's go ahead and see where we left off on this list. Now, I believe I left off at Baylor, if I'm not mistaken. The Baylor Bears is the team that I left off of in the previous segment. So if you're interested in the top 6 teams, as well as Rutgers, because I mentioned Rutgers in that last segment, and my opinion and the biggest questions for those teams, and you can go ahead and tune in to the last video that I just recently uploaded, and that is part 1 of the biggest questions for the college rankings, if you guys are interested in what the questions are for these teams and NCAA basketball. But we're going to start with Iowa State Cyclones. They were ranked 7th last year in the NCAA to start out. So we're going to go ahead and start out with their first question, which is, will TJ Otzelberger find more offensive pop in his team? Like, Iowa State, they've been one of the best defensive teams in the nation, like in the country, and like for the past few seasons. But on offense, they haven't really been that efficient. Like, they've been in the bottom half of the Big 12 in offensive efficiency in every single one of the years that they've been in the bottom part of the defensive efficiency. So they are a pretty solid defensive team, but when it comes to putting the ball in the basket, that's where they really struggle. And Curtis Jones moved into the starting lineup, and he could probably boost the team offensively. And they also added Deshaun Jackson from Charlotte and Nate Hayes from Northern Iowa to help out the offense as well. So we'll see if their offense can be a little bit better, while at the same time their defense doesn't take that much of a hit in terms of efficiency. So that's going to be the big question for them. And next on this list is Duke. They were ranked 8th last season. And the big question for them is, can Cooper Flagg prove that he really is the best player in the country? When Cooper Flagg was competing against the Olympic national team, everybody was like flocking to him. Everybody was just like, wow, he played very well. Wow, the United States team almost lost to them. Wow, he was phenomenal, right? And there's a lot of hype around Cooper Flagg. A lot of people think he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. And now it's time for him to prove it. And it's a really big question, of course, but those are the expectations that we have for Cooper Flagg. And only 3 freshmen have won the Wooden Award, which I'm going to list them off right now. Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson, and Flagg is good enough to be in the contention and be in that running on that list. So, and listen to the names that I just mentioned: Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, and Zion Williamson. Those freshmen, when they won that award, they went on to go into the NBA, and they went on to being one of the best players, some of the best players that the NBA has seen. Kevin Durant, for one, became a top 2 small forward. And Anthony Davis, he's been a dominant big man for the longest time. And Zion Williamson, yes, he keeps getting injured, but when he's healthy, he is a dominant player. And next team on this list is the Arizona Wildcats. And it should also be mentioned that Cooper Flagg is ranked number 1 on ESPN's top 100 list in, college basketball players. So number 9 is the Arizona Wildcats. They were ranked number 9 last season. And now the big question is, can Arizona get rid of its little bugaboo in March Madness? And what does that mean? The Wildcats have been a 1 or a 2 seed in each of the last 3 NCAA tournaments, but they have not made the Elite 8 in any of those. They lost to the 5th seed Houston. They also lost to 15th seed Princeton and the 6th seeded Clemson. While their record and seeding might take a hit moving to the Big 12, playing in the best league in the country should prepare them better for single elimination basketball games. Because that's one of the things that a lot of people don't like to bring up when talking about these kinds of things. It's that these tournament games, they're single game eliminations, and anything can happen in single game elimination. Like, one team can have a ridiculous shooting night, the other team can just be flat out awful. And if one thing doesn't go your way, then it could really, you're done. Like, you're just over, which is completely different than in the NBA, where it's like, definitely the best team is going to win because you're playing in a series. And this is sort of why there's a little bit of luck mixed into a lot of these games, especially when I like to talk about football and the football seasons, especially when football is also single elimination games, which, and a lot of things can happen in football. Same thing with college football. Like, when you have these single elimination games, it's anybody's game. And that's something that a lot of people don't really like to think about. Now, 10th on the power rankings is North Carolina, the Tar Heels, for those of you guys who are confusing. So they were ranked 10th last season, and the big question for them is, will they be able to dominate down low as it has been in recent seasons? So it doesn't look like they're going to dominate the paint this season or on the glass, and that's sort of a common trend that North Carolina likes to do. And it's been a staple and the success of Carolina basketball teams under both Roy Williams and Hubert Davis. But after swinging and missing on a couple of portal centers last spring, the Tar Heels' typical size and proven production isn't really there. One of the key transfer players, Ven Allen Lubin, is only 6'8", while Jalen Withers and Jalen Washington haven't been nearly as consistent as you'd like. So that's really going to be the big question for them. Do they have enough big men in order to actually be effective? Next team on this list is the Auburn Tigers. They were ranked 11th in the NCAA last season. And the big question for them is JP Pegas, forgive me if I botched that last name, the answer at the point guard position? So Bruce Pearl hasn't really had a high-level point guard in the last few years, dealing with a lot of inconsistent decision-making of Wendell Green in 2021 and in 2023, and growing pains of the 5-star freshman Aden Holloway last season. Furman transfer Pegas was arguably the best player in SoCon, but he'll have a lot on his shoulders, and freshman Tahad Pittafor is also another option for the team. And since we are running out of time for just this first segment, I'm going to go ahead and go into our short break and then continue on with this NCAA segment. So we left off at 11, so I'm going to continue off at 12 and see how much farther we can go on in this list in the fourth segment right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned for that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And In this fourth segment, I'm going to continue on with the biggest questions of each and every single one of these NCAA division teams, and no, the ranked NCAA division teams, excuse me. And we're going to go ahead and continue on. We left off at 11 in the last segment with the Auburn Tigers. So now we're going to go to the Texas A&M Aggies, one of the more popular colleges, one of the more popular college teams, both in football and in basketball. It's surprising like how crazy athletic these Alabama programs and like these Texas programs are in both basketball and in football. It's very crazy. It's awesome. And they were previously ranked number 12 in the NCAA. And now the biggest question is, can the Aggies find their groove early on to start the season? The Aggies, they follow a very similar script the last few seasons, where they started out 6-5 with losses to Warford, Murray State, before winning 19 of their next 22 games going into, like, to finish off the season. So it's really, the big question is, can they start out strong and can they stay strong going throughout the season? Last season they were 7-4 and 15-13 before winning 5 in a row and making a run to the SEC semifinal and earning a bid. And early season games against Ohio State, Oregon, Creighton, San Diego State, Wake Forest, Texas Tech, and Purdue won't make the hot start easy, because a lot of these teams are going to be very good. Like, it's not a very easy schedule that they have to start out with. But we'll see. That's their biggest question. And next team on this list was ranked 13, Tennessee Volunteers. And the big question for Tennessee is, can Tennessee maintain its offensive uptick since they let go? Well, not really since they let go, but since Dalton Knecht has been drafted. And the Volunteers, best team of the Rick Barnes era, was also its best offensive team since 2019. And much of that could be attributed to Dalton Knecht and just how good of an offensive player he was. The SEC Player of the Year, who is now on the Los Angeles Lakers, he was phenomenal in that year. He was just fantastic. But Barnes had the Volunteers playing a little bit faster and shooting a lot more threes than you normally would in college. And two things that should carry over to this season. Like, so they should be like, but again, when you're a team that plays super fast and you're a team that relies heavy on three-pointers, it could be very good for you, yes, but it could also be very detrimental to you, because if you start missing your threes, it's game over for you. And if you have a bad game, especially in these tournament games when it's single game elimination, it's game over for you. You have to be consistent every single night, day in and day out. And transfers like Chaz Lanier from North Florida and Darliston Dubar will be tasked with producing offense early and often for the Volunteers this season. And for number 14, the Arkansas Razorbacks, they were ranked number 14th in the NCAA last season. And the biggest question for them is DJ Wagner going to take the next step forward? So Wagner is, he probably caught a lot of criticism in his freshman season. He was the number 1 ranked freshman in the country, but he still averaged 9.9 points, 3 assists, and started 28 games for a team that was a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. He wasn't the number 1 freshman. He's not the number 1 freshman in the country, but he's a pretty solid player. And that said, he'll need to be a little bit more consistent, more efficient, and better at shooting, because Bogey Fland is essentially the only backup point guard for the Razorbacks. So DJ Wagner, coming in from Kentucky, he needs to be able to produce at that point guard spot very, very efficiently. And if he doesn't, then it's over. It's not looking good for them. And next team on this list is the Creighton Blue Jays. They were ranked 15th in the NCAA. And the biggest question for them is, how does Greg McDermott replace 36 plus points per game? And why do I say this? Well, Baylor Scheierman and Trey Alexander, the two leading scorers last season, they lost them. They went out the door. And in their places are transfers Pop Isaac from Texas Tech and Jemiah Neal from Arizona State. Isaacs was a third-team All-Big 12 pick, while Neal brings size to the wing. But they'll both have to shoot the three ball better than they did a year ago. And, losing 36 points of production, it's not ideal if you are if you're a team like that. And the next team is Purdue, the Purdue Boilermakers. They were ranked 16th. And obviously, the big question for them is, what does a post-Zach Edey Purdue team look like? For the coach, for the program, what does it look like? Because Zach Edey has been part of the program for a while. He's been part of Purdue for a while. And now it's just going to be very odd that they don't have that 7'4" center in their roster. Matt Painter was to figure out a way to keep Purdue's success going without the back-to-back Wooden Award winner, Zach Edey, but he has earned a 5th seed or better in 8 straight NCAA tournaments, so there's some optimism, and much of the paint responsibilities is going to go to Trey Kaufman-Renn and Caleb First, as well as a freshman named Daniel Jacobson, who a lot of people consider rather intriguing. And next team on this list is number 17, Marquette, the Golden Eagles. They were ranked 17th last season, and the biggest question for them is what is going to happen at the point guard position. Tyler Kolek is one of the NBA and backup point guard since Sean Jones is still recovering from an ACL. He's still recovering from a torn ACL injury and that he suffered last January. I have no idea what was wrong with my English there. I apologize for that. It was so bad. But aside from that, Tyler Kolek is off to the NBA, and the backup point guard, Sean Jones, is recovering from an ACL injury. And Shaka Smart, that's actually a fire name, could opt to move Cam Jones to the point guard spot, and he's a big-time scorer and a shooter, but he has shown playmaking ability. Stevie Mitchell could also handle the ball more often, and this is just going to be a little bit of an adjustment because obviously when you lose an All-American talent like Tyler Kolek, your team is probably going to suffer a little bit. So it's not that big of a deal. And number 18, I'm going to stop at 20, and then we'll do the last 5 tomorrow in the final segment. We'll do that. So the Indiana Hoosiers were previously ranked 18th going in the NCAA. And the big question that they have is, will the pieces that they have fit on the offensive side of the ball? So last season, Indiana was never really able to put a decent roster that meshed together with the pieces that they had. They had a bad shooting team. They turned the ball over a lot more than they really should have. And they couldn't really string together nice, good quality performances. But Mike Woodson went out and landed Miles Rice, Kanan Carlisle, Omar Ballo, among several other players. And the question still remains is if Ballo and Malik Renew can play together and mesh together on the lineup. Another question is, where does Mackenzie Mbako fit in the rotation? And can anyone in the starting lineup make consistent enough threes? There's plenty of talent, but can they play together? That's really the big question. And the next team, and probably the final team on this list, is the Cincinnati Bearcats, and they were ranked 19th. And the biggest question is Jizzle James' late season surge a sign of things to come? So he's a 6'1" point guard. He started just 2 games last season where he was able to total 46 points and 6 assists. Those were the Bearcats' final 2 games in that season. Day Thomas, who started the other 35 games at the point guard spot, is also going to return. But if Cincinnati is going to finally break through and get to the NCAA tournament, then the James's dynamism might be a key part in this play. So that's all the rankings for through 20. And I'm going to, in a different segment, like probably tomorrow, I'm going to continue do it with that list, and I'm going to finish it with, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, because I'm not going to do 25 because I already covered the Rutgers Scarlet Knights in the previous segment that I just did in yesterday when I did their college rankings, because they're a local team. Like, they play in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey, so I wanted to do that team first because I kind of had to. And if you're interested in what I had to say about that, you can click on that video as well. But we're going to go ahead and go into the fifth and final segment, where we talk about Trae Young and his top 5 NBA shooters, and more particularly him including Klay Thompson on that list of top 5 NBA shooters. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fifth segment, I'm going to be looking at an article which is actually titled, Klay Thompson Catches Strays from Fans as Trae Young Includes Maverick Star in Top 5 Shooters List. And that got me very, very intrigued, because there's a lot of shade being thrown at Klay Thompson right now in this offseason. And I'll elaborate a little bit after I read this article. So, Klay Thompson, been a dominant force on Golden State Warriors. He's played alongside Steph and Draymond. He has 4 NBA championships. And Klay Thompson, who Mark Cuban praised, recently disappointed many fans in the Warriors in the offseason. And the NBA All-Star was traded to the Dallas Mavericks in a 6-team sign-and-trade on July 6th. But he was still being praised for his achievements and skills. In a recent appearance on $1 Million Worth of Game podcast, Trae Young, the star of the Hawks, was asked about his pick for top 5 shooters in the NBA currently. The 25-year-old mentioned Steph Curry, mentioned Damian Lillard, mentioned himself, Klay Thompson, and Bogdan Bogdanovic. However, Thompson's name in the list is not well suited to the fans who started criticizing the Mavericks star in the comment section posted on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I'm sure all of you guys know exactly what the comments were saying in X, formerly known as Twitter. Everybody was saying the guy that went 0 for 10 in an elimination game. Ever since Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 against the Sacramento Kings in that play-in game, that has been the only thing that anyone that talks about Klay Thompson has talked about. That is the only thing that people talk about. They only say, hey, did you know Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game? Hey, remember Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game? Remember, Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game. Oh, guess what? Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game. It's been all over the media. Like, you can see it all over the comments section. You can see it, like, randomly in random posts that have nothing to do with Klay Thompson. Just some random guy there just saying, remember, Klay Thompson went 0 for 10 in an elimination game. Like, they are trying very, very, very hard to remember that game and never, ever forget that that game actually happened. And I think, in my opinion, I think that's just, yes, he deserves the criticism because, yeah, that's absolutely appalling. But it's also rather disrespectful because doing this is essentially like erasing every other thing that Klay Thompson has done in the postseason when it comes to three-point shooting. Like, does anybody remember that game winner against Toronto that tied the series before he got injured? Does anybody remember Game 6 when Klay Thompson against OKC hit all of the threes in the second half? Every single one of them. Who else remembers when they played against Cleveland several times, where Klay Thompson, every time he got the ball, it's just he wouldn't miss? There are so many playoff performances that Klay Thompson has performed in and stepped up when Steph Curry himself hasn't even stepped up in. Klay Thompson has one bad elimination game, and that immediately just discredits all of that. Disrespectful, completely disrespectful. And Klay Thompson recently joined the Mavericks, like the article continues going on, Mavericks after playing 13 dominating seasons with the Warriors. However, his departure was devastating for many fans and his teammates. Along with Curry and Green, several other players also expressed their thoughts on the four-time NBA champion's exit during a recent interview on Sway's Universe. And according to StatMuse, Klay Thompson averaged 17 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists in 77 games during the season. The upcoming season is approaching, and it will be fascinating to see how Klay Thompson can enhance his game while playing alongside players like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. So, now, for the best shooters in this season, obviously, that list is still rather, up in the air. Steph and Dame, obviously, I feel like those two have to be included when you're talking about the best shooters now. And, let's be real. If you were to put any other shooter, aside from Klay Thompson on there, who would you guys put? I'm actually curious. Who would you guys put there on the top 5 shooting list for the NBA currently right now? Because, quite frankly, I can't really think of one in the NBA. Like right now, I can't really think of one that I would want to put over Klay Thompson. And yes, I know that's it's a little bit niche, because it's like Klay Thompson, he didn't really play well or as well as we're used to seeing him, and I completely understand it. And there's so many, other players that you could argue shot a lot better from three. There's a lot of players. I'm looking at the 3-point percentage right now from a lot of these players, and yeah, it's a very huge difference, like in terms of percentage, like just how much better a lot of these players have shot over Klay. But again, if I were to give the ball to anybody in a catch and shoot, and I would rely on Klay. I would for sure rely on Klay Thompson to hit that three. And I don't know, maybe you could probably put somebody like Kevin Durant in that spot instead, even though I don't really agree with that. Maybe even Paul George as well, you could argue. But again, I'm not entirely sure how you would who would be a better 3-point shooter. Who would you put in aside from Klay Thompson in the 3-point shooting category? Because there's several options, right? You can put Grayson Allen over there. You can even put Luke Kennard in there, even though he didn't really play that many games. There's so many good players that have definitely that deserve to be on this maybe over Klay Thompson. But again, I can't really think of one. I genuinely cannot think of one. LeBron shot better from three than Klay Thompson, so I can't entirely base it off of field goal percentage and 3-point shooting percentage, because if we were to base all of that off of 3-point percentage and field goal percentage, then it just wouldn't be fair to somebody like Klay Thompson, because you also have to remember that it's not just about hitting shots. It's about the shots that you can hit and how frequently you can hit those shots. So if you are, let's say you're a catch and shooter and let's say you're a great corner shooter, like PJ Tucker, for example, great corner shooter, fantastic corner shooter, and a very, very consistent corner shooter, arguably one of the most consistent corner shooters that the NBA has seen recently. Are we really going to put him in a top shooting category just because of his high 3-point shooting? I don't think so. Like, it's going to be, there's a lot of other factors that go into that, like maybe just how well you can shoot off the ball, how well you could shoot off the dribble, all of those things that go into shooting, as well as how deep you can shoot. Like, a lot of those things, they go into, at least in my opinion, they go into it when factoring, who are the best shooters in the NBA. And again, LeBron shot better from three than a lot of players did in the NBA last season. And I know for a fact nobody is going to agree with LeBron being one of the top 5 shooters in the NBA. I guarantee you nobody's going to agree with that, because they're all going to be like, oh my God, seriously, LeBron, really? Boo. Because, he's LeBron. And, I get that, and I understand why people are a little bit hesitant on putting somebody like LeBron that high on that list. But again, I have no problem with it. And if we're gonna go off of based off of field goal percentages, I'm just using that as an argument that it's rather null and void. It wouldn't make any sense to do that, and which is why it's rather difficult to deciding who is a very competent 3-point shooter. And I'm looking at the 3-point shooting list right now. I can't pick a player that I would put over Klay Thompson. I can't. Even though, and there's so many people on this list. I mean, there's Colin Sexton, there's Gary Trent Jr., there's Lowry, there's even Dort shot better than Klay Thompson. Grayson Allen, Luke Kennard, Al Horford, Roy Hachimura, Jamal Murray, and several players, they shot phenomenally from three, and they shot better than Klay Thompson. But obviously, those guys aren't better shooters than him. Let me know in the comments what you guys think and who you would put as a better shooter than Klay Thompson, because quite frankly, I can't really come up with one. And that's just my opinion on the list. I have no problem really with Trae Young's list. I also have no problem with him picking himself, because as you should, if you're an NBA player that shoots the 3 ball, I have a feeling you should you should pick yourself, because you should feel confident in your own abilities. I have no problem with Trae Young including himself on that list whatsoever. And really, the only problem that I have is just the fact that everyone just keeps criticizing Klay about going 0 for 10 in an elimination game, as if, shooters and players, they have to be perfect and completely flawless in the game. And that's just not happening. You're never going to find that. And it's very difficult to find that consistent of a shooter. Shooters shoot. Some games you're going to go 10 for 10. Some games you're going to go 0 for 10. I really don't think we should keep milking it. But that's just me. And I'm a LeBron fan. I had to deal with Klay Thompson kicking LeBron's butt in the postseason alongside with Steph and and Kevin Durant. And I'm over here saying that the disrespect to Klay Thompson is a little bit much. So that should tell you just how bad the comments have been about him. So that's all that I have to say about this segment, and that's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. If you really want your comment or question to get recognized, then you can use the Super Chat and send in your donations and your comments that way. If Super Chat isn't your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and donate to the show that way. That's all that I have for you today on this segment. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that